It should have been a night of victory, of pride and cheers echoing across the Algiers sky. Over 40,000 people had come together in a moment of seemingly unbreakable
The
joy.
cheering
But in just a
suddenly
few short minutes,
fractures.
that joy crumbled,
Joy
just as the
collapses
concrete
within
stands had
minutes.
silently decayed over the years. When the cheers turned into screams, when the stadium lights plunged into darkness, an unforeseen tragedy unfolded. This is the story of a moment when a sporting festival turned into a nightmare, and of the terrible price of negligence and indifference to human safety. Part 1. The celebration turned into a nightmare. On the evening of the 6th of June 2025, the large stadium in Algiers erupted in jubilation. The match had just ended, and the home team had secured a crucial victory, causing over 40,000 fans to almost lose control of their excitement. Cheers erupted like a storm. Vuvuzela blasts ripped through the air, and drums pounded against the concrete walls, creating a rhythm that shook the entire stadium. Red and green flags fluttered brilliantly under the stadium lights. People hugged, danced, live-streamed, and shouted until their voices were hoarse. The atmosphere was a feast of sound and emotion, where everyone thought nothing could break this moment of happiness. No one knew that in just a few minutes, that frenzy would turn into terror. In the North Stand, the most crowded area, there was a section of railing that was over 2 decades old. Several security personnel had reported it being slightly loose, sometimes vibrating gently when people leaned against it. But amidst the surging crowd moving in the same direction, no one had time to notice such a small detail. The crowd continued to cheer, still pushing forward, still living in the moment of victory. And as the joy reached its peak, fate was also silently approaching, waiting for the moment to explode. Part 2. The first moment of crack. It all began with a sound so faint, it was indistinguishable in the immense noise. Crack. A few people standing close to the railing at the front jumped, not because they heard it, but because they felt the floor beneath their feet vibrate slightly and rapidly. A tremor, like the breath of the earth, but behind them, thousands were surging forward, shouting, patting each other on the shoulder, pushing onward to find the nearest exit. There was no room for doubt, no time for anyone to understand what was happening. Then a second sound rang out louder, more jarring, like bones breaking. Crack. A hollow, worn steel railing snapped from its anchor. The movement was so small that only a small group near the edge noticed it, but for the already weakened structure, it was a fatal break. The metallic snap made those in front turn back in alarm, but the crowd behind continued to push. Just one more moment, and that moment arrived instantly. The floor tilted almost imperceptibly. The railings shook violently like taut strings. Shouts began from a small group and spread rapidly. Thousands of people didn't understand what was happening, but they sensed one thing. Something had just gone terribly wrong. Security personnel below looked up and saw the crowd in the north begin to sway like waves. They immediately grabbed their radios. North Stand, Level 1 alert. Check the railings. But the warning came a heartbeat too late. Part 3. Collapse. When the stands opened their mouths to swallow people, no warning, no time to run. There was only a deep, rumbling sound, like the snapping of an old pillar. Crash! The upper tier of the stands plummeted vertically, as fast and sudden as an elevator with a broken cable. Those standing near the edge didn't even understand what was happening. They were flung off the floor, suspended in midair for a brief moment before plummeting straight down to the floor below. Their bodies slammed into plastic seats, metal railings, broken iron bars, creating a chaotic, sharp cacophony. Columns of concrete dust rose, blanketing the corner of the stands like the smoke from a freshly exploded bomb. The cheers that had echoed just seconds before were instantly swallowed by screams, cries for help, panic, shouts of names. Not from a few people, but from thousands. The area that had just collapsed became a dark, deep pit. Its concrete edges ripped apart, revealing broken iron bars bent like broken bones. Television cameras captured the entire scene. A section of the grandstand swallowed up like the jaws of a monster. The cameras shook violently, wobbled, and then lost focus as the entire recording setup was shaken. People standing at the edge of the crater rushed to pull at the arms, reaching up from the rubble. But the railings around them continued to bend and deform like heat-sensitive plastic strips. The concrete beneath their feet cracked, the fissures spreading like a spider web, widening by a few centimeters each second. Chaos was no longer just beginning. It had spread, and nothing could stop it anymore. Part 4. The chain of disaster. The spread of collapse. The incident didn't stop at the first section of the grandstand. The sudden collapse created a shockwave that spread through the concrete structure, causing nearby sections of the railing to shake violently and then break apart in a domino effect. The metal bars, worn down by decades of use, could not withstand the immense pressure from thousands of bodies crammed together in panic. A series of cracks, clangs, booms followed in quick succession. Then the horrific scene unfolded in an instant. More than 70 people fell from a height of over 6 meters onto the cold concrete below. The sounds of crashing, cries for help, and screams echoed throughout the stadium, mingling with the dust and the bending of metal. A trembling witness recounted, "I ran to pull a boy out, but when I touched the railing, it broke like rotten wood.
Clear the area!
I've never seen
Move
steel
back! Everyone,
soften
move
like that."
back!
Security personnel rushed into the collapsed area, but they were almost powerless. They couldn't push through the sea of people jostling and trampling each other, trying to escape the stands that were tilting as if about to collapse again. Many were swept away by the crowd, slipping and disappearing in the chaotic screams. What was supposed to be a football
please
festival,
remain
the
calm.
celebration had
Evacuate the
transformed into a
stadium
scene of a
immediately.
true humanitarian disaster. No longer a sporting incident, no longer a technical malfunction. This was the moment the entire stadium became a giant crushing machine. Part 5. Rescue in the dark. When the stadium loses its light. Immediately after the collapse, the stadium's safety system activated. To prevent the risk of a widespread electrical short circuit, a large part of the emergency lighting system automatically shut off. And in just seconds, nearly half the stadium was plunged into thick darkness, like a void swallowing all sound. In the flickering light from thousands of mobile phones, rescue teams began rushing into the dangerous area. They had to move step by step, risking their lives. Following the faint cries for help from those trapped, the gasping breaths drowned out by concrete dust, the tapping of metal as arms searched for life. They searched for bodies trapped under the broken seats, trying to pull people out of the cracks in the concrete, using makeshift ropes from the rotating equipment and stadium pillars to pull surviving victims out of the hole in the grandstand.
Clear
Every
the way,
minute was a
move!
race
Get out
against
of the
death.
way! We
The
need through
seriously
now!
injured were carried out on stretchers, but the escape routes, not designed for large-scale disasters, made evacuation slow and congested. The tunnel leading to the ambulances became a desperate corridor where groans mingled with hurried footsteps. A paramedic, his face covered in white dust, said through tears, "It's like seeing two worlds. One side is the darkness of despair, the other is the blue light of the ambulances. Between those two worlds are only a few steps, but for many, they never made it. Darkness still hung over part of the stadium, and the search for survivors was not over."
Red
Part
alert.
6.
All available
Overwhelmed
staff to the main
hospitals.
corridor.
Numbers
We
no
need
one wants to
immediate
count.
assistance in
Hospitals
Trauma
around
Bay
the
3.
stadium immediately
Get these
activated
stretchers
a red
moving
alert.
now.
Emergency systems were deployed to their maximum capacity, and all available beds were mobilized. But no matter how quickly they prepared, they couldn't cope with the onslaught of people.
Multiple
In just 30
fractures. Get 'em
minutes,
stabilized.
over
We
70
need blood
victims
now.
were brought to the emergency
Clear the corridor.
rooms.
We have incoming.
Many with multiple
Triage next
fractures,
patient.
many with head injuries, many with severe blood loss, requiring transfusions in the hospital corridors. At least 3 people died on the spot, even before ambulances reached the stadium.
We haven't
Doctors
witnessed a
later
mass
admitted,
accident
"We
so
haven't
rapid,
witnessed a mass
violent, and
accident
devastating
so rapid,
in years.
violent,
Many
and
patients became
devastating in
unstable
years.
within minutes of
Many
admission.
patients became unstable within minutes of admission. Meanwhile, outside the hospital gates, relatives of the victims poured in despair. Tears and cries of missing persons echoed incessantly. Phone calls went unanswered. The constantly updated lists sent shivers down everyone's spines. Outside, social media exploded with countless videos of the scene. Images of swirling concrete dust, arms reaching up from the rubble, cries for help echoing from dozens of angles. Algeria, the evening before, living in the joy of victory, was now plunged into an unbelievable state of mourning. Part 7. Investigation.
What
The
is
crack was not
revealed
natural.
is
The
not a
following day,
freak
the
accident,
Algerian government
not
immediately
an
launched an
unforeseeable
urgent
failure.
investigation into the
It is the
grandstand
result
collapse.
of years
Construction
of
experts, structural engineers, and the Construction Supervision Agency were mobilized overnight. When the preliminary report was released, the entire nation was plunged into a state of both outrage and despair, for what was discovered was not an accident, but the consequence of prolonged neglect. The
Inspection
initial
logs
findings
are
indicated
incomplete.
The grandstands,
Critical
built
checks were
decades ago,
skipped.
were no
The
longer
stadium
suitable
had
for the
not
scale of modern
undergone a
events.
full
The
structural
railings were
inspection
severely
before the
deteriorated.
match.
With many sections reduced to thin steel after years of wear and tear, some metal joints were deeply rusted and had lost their load-bearing capacity. The emergency exits were too narrow, failing to meet international safety standards, and, most importantly, The stadium had not been thoroughly inspected before this crucial match. The
It's
pressure
like
from
stretching
tens
a
of thousands of
rotten
people
rope.
converging in one
It
direction,
didn't break
pushing
from
and
a
shoving in
single
a moment of
cause,
excitement,
but because
placed
all
immense
the
stress on the
factors
weakest point of the
converged at the
structure.
right
A
time.
chief investigating engineer said at a press conference, his voice heavy as stone, "It's like stretching a rotten rope. It didn't break from a single cause, but because all the factors converged at the right time. This disaster didn't start from a single crack. It started from a loose, old, and neglected system that had been neglected for years." Part 8. Significance, lessons the world must not forget.
This tragedy
The
was
Algerian
not
stadium
unique to
collapse
one
quickly became
country.
a powerful warning.
It
Not
was a
only for that
warning
country, but for
to
the world.
all.
It reiterated a painful but obvious truth. In major sporting events, crowd management, building safety, and the responsibility of the organizers are not recommendations, they are vital obligations. Every small mistake can cost lives. This tragedy is a somber echo of disasters that have occurred in
Joy
Guinea,
is more
Indonesia,
fragile than
England,
we
South
imagine.
Africa, where moments that should have been filled with joy turned into tears, all because of a broken railing, a rotten row of seats, a locked emergency exit, a moment of carelessness. No matter the continent, the story remains the same. Joy is more fragile than one imagines, and the incident in Algeria
That
clearly
night's
confirms
disaster
one thing.
will be
A stadium
remembered
is
for
not just a
years
place
to
where
come.
fans cheer for their team. It is a
Not to
place where the
spread
lives
fear.
of tens of thousands of people depend on the sturdiness of each concrete slab, each bolt, each railing. That night's disaster will be remembered for years to come, not to sow fear, but to remind us that what happened must never be repeated.
The
Part
fear of
9.
not knowing if they would see
Survivors,
daylight again.
unhealing memories.
Survival does not
After
mean the
days
end
of
of
treatment,
suffering.
some of the
It means
survivors were
learning
able
to
to
live
recount
with
the
what
horrific
remains.
moments they experienced. But these stories weren't meant to satisfy public curiosity. They were meant to highlight the extent of the pain a disaster can leave behind.
When I
A
opened my
32-year-old
eyes,
man
only
recounted
I was
tearfully,
breathing.
"I fell with
Every
3
time I
others.
close my
When I
eyes,
opened
I
my
hear it
eyes,
again.
only I was breathing. I
It
wish I
sounds
didn't
like the
remember
earth
anything."
cracking.
A woman with a broken leg and a collapsed lung said she still hears the sound of the collapse every time she closes her eyes. "It rings in my head like the earth cracking. Every night I dream of running, but my legs won't move."
Wounds
Many
in memory
witnesses,
never
though not
fully
seriously
disappear.
injured, suffered
The scene
severe
shifts to
psychological
public
trauma,
squares
chronic
across the
insomnia,
country.
panic at loud
People
noises,
place flowers
phobias
on
of
the
crowded
ground.
places. A group of volunteer psychologists came to provide support because they knew one thing: physical wounds may heal, but wounds in memory never fully heal. In the squares, people placed flowers, lit candles, and displayed pictures of the deceased. The atmosphere was so silent that only the sound of lighters, lighting candles, and choked breathing could be heard. Algeria is not only grieving, but mourning for its own beliefs. Part
All
10.
stadiums
Legacy.
across the country
Changes
must
after the
undergo
tragedy.
full
Just 1
structural
week after the
re-inspection
disaster,
within
the
60
Algerian
days.
government announced the
No
biggest overhaul
exceptions.
in the nation's sporting history. All stadiums nationwide had to be re-inspected within 60 days. Substandard facilities would be closed immediately. Railings, seats, bolts, and joints had to be replaced. Crowd management procedures were rewritten from scratch. Many
Safety
other
standards
countries following
only
the
seem
tragedy
burdensome
also began
until
reviewing
the
their
cost of
stadiums.
ignoring them
The
is
Algiers
revealed.
tragedy showed that no place is immune to mistakes if complacency prevails. The African Football Confederation published new, much stricter safety guidelines. Requirements once considered cumbersome now became mandatory.
That
In
was the
Algiers,
legacy of the
people
disaster.
returned to the stadium after months
Not in
of upgrades.
tears,
They walked past new railings,
but in
new
change.
seats, wider emergency exits, but one thing could not be fixed: the void left by those who did not return. At the memorial service a year later, a plaque was placed at the entrance. Remember them so that no one else should die because of things that could have been prevented. That was the legacy of the disaster. Not in tears, but in change.
The
Part
Algiers
11.
stadium
Global
collapse
shock.
is no
As
longer
the world looks to
confined to
Algeria,
one country.
the Algiers stadium collapse
me.
disaster was not
there
confined
anybody
to
there?
one country. Within hours of the incident, major news outlets around the world, BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN, Reuters, all reported it prominently. Images of the stadium engulfed in white dust, cries for help echoing under the flickering light of cell phones, sent shivers down the spines of people around the world. Many countries
After
reacted
Algiers,
immediately.
caution
In Europe,
was no
the
longer
European
an
Union
option.
convened an emergency
It
meeting,
became a
demanding that
duty.
all major stadiums re-evaluate their structural integrity and evacuation procedures. France, Italy, and Spain simultaneously postponed several large-scale football events for review.
These
In England,
lessons were
home to some of the
written in
biggest
lives.
stadium tragedies in
They
history,
must never
the press
be forgotten
immediately recalled painful
and never
memories.
taken lightly.
Hillsborough, Ibrox,
We
Bradford.
know this pain.
Experts warned that the lessons from the past must never be forgotten and certainly not taken lightly. In South Africa and Indonesia, which had witnessed stadium tragedies just a few years prior, people shared deep sympathy with Algeria. Many non-profit organizations began fundraising to support the victims. The International
No
Football
match,
Federation,
no victory
FIFA,
is worth the
sent
lives
official
of
condolences
fans.
and issued a strong
When
message.
the world speaks
No
with
match,
one voice,
no victory is worth the lives of fans. A flurry of hashtags swept across global social media. Millions of posts from fans around the world poured in offering prayers, condolences, and reminding everyone that spectator safety must be the unwavering cornerstone of any sporting event. But
The
perhaps the
world
most shocking
watches,
image was the following night when the
not with
Algiers stadium
judgment,
was completely dark.
not with
Only
accusation,
tiny, flickering candles remained
but
around the
with
collapsed
shared
stands
grief.
like stars falling to the earth for those who would never return. The world looked to Algeria, not with judgment, but with shared grief and the hope that this tragedy would awaken real change